We're going to go ahead and get started. We just have some preliminary stuff to go through. So while folks are still coming in, we'll just go right on ahead here. So good morning, everybody. Welcome. Happy Economic Development Week. We're so excited to be sharing out all the wonderful things that everybody is doing in our state as well as internationally related to economic development. Economic development is so important to the vitality of our communities. So it's important that we tell our story and tell it loudly and widely. So that's what we're doing today. My name is Kim Woodworth, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Executive Director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. So just a few housekeeping items before we start. You've all entered into this webinar on mute for recording quality purposes, but we do encourage you all to ask questions of our presenters today. You can type them into the chat section at the bottom of your screen or raise your hand using the reactions button. But today's event is really to educate, bring new ideas and best practices forward. If you have any questions after this webinar, please send them to EDCC's Administrator, Bobby Blank. We will also follow up after today's webinar with a link to the webinar as well as the presentation. We'll also post it to our website to the two landing pages that are dedicated to one Economic Development Week, as well as the data resources page that we're going to be discussing today. And finally, please follow today's discussion on our social media outlets at EDC of Co and Downtown COLO, and be sure to use the hashtag Colorado or CO Econ Dev Week 25, as well as hashtag Econ Dev Week, so that we can follow you. For those of you who are new to us, EDCC is a statewide industry association that supports economic development efforts across across our state. We connect our communities, our members, and our partners to high-quality educational opportunities and trusted resources, and advocate for sound policies and programs that support a vibrant economy and enhance quality of life for all of Colorado. And like I said, it's officially Economic Development Week. EDCC and Downtown Colorado, Inc., along with our state partners and federal partners, OEDIT, Department of Local Affairs, CWDC, Co-Align, Manufacturers Edge, USDA, and the EDA. We're once again teaming up this year to bring an award-winning week-long celebration of educational webinars and social media campaign highlighting Colorado's economic development successes. We ask you to join us in the celebration and highlight why economic development is so important to the economic vitality of our communities and our state. Each day we will be posting on our social media outlets on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We'll be following all of your social media posts and helping amplify your message. But please help us find you by tagging us at EDC of Co and at Downtown COLO, as well as use those hashtags that I just mentioned so that we can follow your posts, and that all of your posts will be put into one, just by going to those hashtags helps us follow you. Also, we are thrilled to announce that EDCC's annual Drive Lead Succeed conference registration is now open. It's our early bird registration rate, and we will be in Pueblo this year. Please also consider sponsoring this event. This is a wonderful opportunity to support the efforts in gathering the state's economic development community as well as our workforce development community together, helping provide educational opportunities, valuable resources, networking with the top economic development professionals in the state, and enjoying lots of fun. Reach out to me or Bobby if you have any questions, and Bobby is dropping those links into the chat section. Also, EDCC's EDDie Award nominations are open. They're open year-round, but we're just highlighting them. We are planning a very special event this year, very similar to last, and it is a must-not-miss event, of course. Please submit your nominations for Best Community, Business, Volunteer, Partner, Legislator, Rookie, or Economic Development Achievement Award by the end of July. And then also, what's really coming up very quickly is our basic economic development course, June 9th through the 13th. Metro Denver EDC is hosting us this year at the Denver Metro Chamber. Registration and scholarships, as well as travel stipends, are available, and the BEDC course provides that substantial introduction to the theory and fundamentals of comprehensive economic development. So without further ado, let's get on to today's webinar. Are you all struggling to find the right data in order for you to put together your economic development projects or programs or reports? Today, we are going to learn how Colorado's top economists Colorado's top economists will show you how to leverage EDCC's free data library, submit effective data inquiries, access discounts, and demystify data discrepancies so you can make informed decisions. Today's webinar would not be possible without the hard work of our professional development and data committees. It's not just Bobby and I working behind the scenes, bringing all the great resources and tools to our members, but it's the army of over 100 volunteers supporting these efforts who find significant value in equipping our professionals with the latest trends, resources, and tools. With that, I'd like to introduce today Steve Josephic. He is the Deputy Director for the Grand Junction Economic Partnership, EDCC's Data Committee Chair, and Board Secretary. Steve's chief responsibility in business development. Steve supports all programs aimed towards the creation of new primary jobs, assists businesses with expansions and relocations, and serves as the point person for all data. So without further ado, let's give Steve a big round of applause and a big Zoom welcome. Steve, handing it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. Just really want to welcome everyone to the first webinar in our Knowledge Network series during Economic Development Week, Data 101. So the EDCC has been doing a great job with this series, and it's a pleasure to finally be a part of this one. So yeah, thanks for having me and the rest of the panelists that we have on board today. So I've been with the Grand Junction Economic Partnership for almost 11 years now, and in that time, I've come to realize what a critical role data plays in economic development decision making. It can help identify opportunities, such as having data revealing trends in industries, workforce skills, market demand. Data drives policy and programming design. I mean, it can help shape targeted initiatives for job creation, workforce development, and small business support. Data could measure impact, so tracking job growth, tax revenue, capital investment. It can also help strengthen community engagement, so sharing clear, visualized data builds trust and support among stakeholders, especially useful in working to convince elected officials, like a lot of us are oftentimes tasked to do. And also helps us improve competitive positioning by benchmarking our communities against each other. But there's lots of other different examples in how data can be utilized, which brings me back to the purpose of this Data 101 webinar, and that's leveraging the resources that the EDCC has to offer. So today we'll be discussing the existing resources available through the Data and Resources Hub that's on the EDCC website. And we'll also be speaking with top economists and economic developers to gain some insight into their uses of data in their fields. So time to share my screen. Actually, Kim, would you mind advancing the slide for me? Great. So today we have with us Brian Lewandowski, Executive Director with the Lead School of Business, University of Colorado Boulder, also a EDCC board member. Tim Komarek, the Associate Professor of Economics, Ready at Colorado State University. We also have Greg Taunton, economist with the State Demography Office with the Department of Local Affairs, and Heather Otter, Program Manager with Region 9 Economic Development District. So we'll be bringing these four into a panel discussion, but first wanted to show you some of the updates and changes that we have on the EDCC website, as far as just new things to show off that we have as far as resources that are available to you all through the EDCC. So if you navigate to the EDCC online.org website, you'll be able to see resources and then data resources. So this landing page provides an overview of the resources that's available to you, and to have the best experience. And if you're an EDCC member, you should first create an account and be sure to log in, because that's going to open up a bunch of other resources that you wouldn't be able to access otherwise. So looking here, we have 4 different options on the 4 different tabs, looking at public resources, member-only reports, community and regional examples, and custom data support. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll get this this next slide that Kim, would you mind forwarding on to the next slide? There we go, perfect. So here, you will be able to put in your location and filter by category to get a great big list of resources that are living on the EDCC website. And this allows you to look at different regions, counties, cities by the state, and then different types of resources that are available to you, whether it's demographics, impact reports, or anything like that might be available to you. And Kim, would you mind advancing to the next slide? Great. So with this first section, looking at the members only reports, these are the gated resources that are available to EDCC members. So these gated documents are free for EDCC members, and they require a fee for non-members. And currently within the section, it contains the salary survey as well as the incentives best practices report. So the EDCC will continue to populate this section as more reports get generated. So looking to really see this one grow. The next section down are our regional community examples. So these are reports that are generated by cities, counties, regions, and it's a great spot for other communities to get ideas and sample reports that they could potentially duplicate to create reports for their own communities. So you pretty much just see the best practices reports for other communities. You'll be able to find economic impact reports. There might be some annual reports that the different organizations are putting out. So you can see that there's a nice start to our list of resources here. And again, this part here is going to continue to grow. And the last section off to the right is the public resources section. So these are free and open access data from trusted resources such as the U.S. Census Bureau, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Colorado State Demography Office, and includes data sets on demographics, labor, business climate, and much, much more. So each data report will have a live link that will take you directly to the source's original website. So looking at this here, this is more or less just a single stop location for most data sets that are being utilized by economic developers today. Kim, next slide, please. Now, if you're a community that doesn't necessarily have all of the tools required to do and to generate some of these reports on your own, we have this great resource called it's listed under the custom data support. So EDCC members have access to customized reports and impact studies at specially negotiated rates. So whatever your community or organization needs, it can be requested here. So from economic impact studies to labor market analysis to industry sector profiles, those are just a few of the examples of what can be requested here. Um, Once your request has been submitted, the EDCC Data Committee will review the request, will assign the request to the appropriate committee member or members, and then conversations will be had on the specifics of the report, as well as the anticipated costs and timelines for the project. So really a great resources for those who don't have their own resources or tools to do some of these reports on their own. So really a good knowledge base through the EDCC's data committee to be able to help with some of these reports that might not be possible otherwise. So Kim, next slide, please. Great. So this is something that you'd find on on that data resources landing page. And what this is one quick second. So this is the section of data resources that are available through our special EDCC member rates. So these rates are memberships and subscriptions to some of the top economic development software platforms that would be provided to you at a discounted rate. So currently Lightcast, Implan, Gazelle AI, and DCI, they're available at these discounted rates. And I know Kim's always working hard to expand on these offerings right now, but currently this is kind of what we're looking at as far as some of the software platforms that are available to you through EDCC membership. So really great resource there. Next slide, Clint. Great. And finally, the final section on that data resources landing page is our call to action of joining the EDCC Data Committee. So this committee brings together public and private sector professionals who specialize in research analysis and the implementation of meaningful data tools. So by joining, you can stay at the forefront of emerging data trends and best practices. You could collaborate with experts and peer professionals in economic development, and you can influence the tools and resources EDCC offers to communities across the state. So in this committee, we have top economists from the state, but don't let that intimidate or sway you if you're not quite working at that capacity, because I know I sure wasn't when I first started with the data committee. But we're always looking for data savvy EDCC members to help bring a fresh perspective. So sign up if you're interested, and please do. You'd be able to reach out to Kim or myself, and we'd be able to get you set up and ready for the first meeting. All right. So we're all wrapped up now with our session on the updates that the EDCC data resources page has had, and looking to get into our panel discussion now. So once again, we have Brian Lewandowski, Greg Taunton, Tim Komarek, and Heather Otter joining us here as our top economists in the area and economic developers as well. And one quick second here, having a little technical glitch. Okay, perfect. So what I would like to do first, we've made some brief introductions to our panelists, but what I would like to ask for each of them to do is maybe get yourself off of mute, and if I could have you each just give yourself a quick introduction by letting us know which organization that you're with, just the purpose and mission of your organization, and the role that you play within that organization. And we'll just go in order here by who I see on my screen. So Brian, would you mind going first?
You bet. Thanks, Steve, and thanks to EDCC for the opportunity to talk with all of you today. I'm Brian Lewandowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Business Research Division at the Lee School of Business, University of Colorado Boulder. And our organization is a bridge between the community and the university. So we work externally from the school, working with governments, companies, and nonprofits to do a lot of custom economic and business research. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on today.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Tim, would you mind going next?
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with everybody. I'm Tim Comrack. I'm an economics professor at Colorado State University. And I also wear a hat where I work for extension at CSU, which is actually really fun in the sense that it gives me this like feel for what happens in the classroom and in academia, but also this kind of vision for what's happening out in Colorado communities. I co-direct a center at CSU called the Regional Economic Development Institute with Dawn Thomany, who I think is also on the call. And that center is looking to kind of understand, analyze, and inform economic development strategies, specifically focused to some of the underserved communities in Colorado.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. Heather, would you mind going next?
Sure. Hello. Pleased to be here with you all today. My name is Heather, and I am in Southwest Colorado at Region 9 Economic Development District. So we serve 5 counties and 2 tribes, Southern Ute Indian Tribe and Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, for all things economic development and planning. So we have a business loan fund. We lend to small and startup businesses across the region. And then I oversee the SEDS process. So in my area of work, we do a lot of data work, hence why I'm here today, but and the outreach to our 5 communities focusing on their priority projects.
Great. Thanks so much, Heather. And Greg.
Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Totten with the Colorado State Demography Office, where I am an economist. Our office's primary role is to provide forecasts of the population in the state through 2050. And as part of that, we do a job projection through 2050, which is also my primary duty. However, we also like to operate as a data resource for the state, and we really like to help out with people across the state when they have questions looking for data from the census, from us, or from other areas, and are regularly helping out on that.
Perfect. Great. Thanks so much. Okay. So to kick things off, I would like to start with Tim. And for the rest of the panelists, I'd just like to keep this as conversational as possible. So please feel free to add to the questions as you see fit. But Tim, your job straddles being an academic economist and professor in the economics department at Colorado State University, while also working with economic development practitioners in Colorado communities. How do those 2 roles shape your view of economic development and data?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question, Steve. I think those roles kind of help me think about economic development maybe more holistically than kind of some have traditionally. It's not just job creation necessarily, even though that's a really important part to it, but it's also kind of working with community stakeholders to understand what their goals are for their communities, and how do we kind of think within the constraints that they're facing, how to achieve some of those goals. I think my kind of professor hat often has this idea of an economic model floating around in my head, and that often comes out in kind of talks I give. And that can play itself in a lot of different ways. I think we can often think about how different aspects of a local economy are interrelated with each other. And you can even think about kind of housing prices and wages and amenities and how those kind of are interacted with each other, but also how kind of commuting and labor markets, so in places outside of your region, might really matter for the economic development outcomes that you're actually facing. So one part of my job then is trying to think about tools that might be helpful for communities to think about how kind of different pieces are interrelated with each other. And then I think the other big part of my job that kind of comes through in different ways that I also interact with communities is thinking about how to measure or understand if kind of one thing is causing another. That's a big push in kind of the academic side of my job, kind of understanding causality. And that really leads me to think differently and think about how to measure how certain things affect each other. An example is I have a project right now that kind of recently started on understanding bids, so business improvement districts, and how much are those actually moving the needle or not for Colorado communities. And this lets me kind of think about kind of that public finance tool and trying to understand kind of its use in like the broader scheme of other tools that economic developers might kind of be focused on.
Tim, that's great. Yeah, appreciate that response. And actually, one thing I did want to mention to the audience here is that well, prior to this event, you should have all received an email with the final details of the webinar, as well as a call to action to come with examples of a few questions. And not sure if all of you have seen that, but we wanted to pose you with a few questions that we will post the questions in the chat. And please respond in the chat with any responses you may have, and we'll do our best to address as many of those as we can toward the end of the program. But what the questions are is what types of data are you looking for? What recent problems were you trying to solve that you needed data for? And if you were able to solve the problem, what data resources did you use? So I think, yeah, if you have any responses to any of those questions, please add them to the chat, and we'll be able to go through and address as many of those with our panelists here as we can. So getting back to our next question here, Greg. As part of your work at the Colorado State Demography Office, you regularly receive requests from data resources looking for assistance locating specific data or data on specific topics. Can you talk about your process for identifying and locating that data when responding to these requests?
Thank you for that. That's a great question. So, yeah, we get a lot of questions in our office that are often submitted through our website. And oftentimes, those questions might be extremely specific when they come across, and maybe not always with a lot of context. So you might get something like, how many senior music therapy specialists are there in Jefferson County? And we might look and say, I don't think there's a way to answer that. Also, maybe there's a better way to answer that question. And so often what ends up happening is sometimes we will just, if it's a specific request, kind of point to that data resource. But even if we have that readily available, one of the first things that I like to do, and a lot of other people in our office like to do, is just send a message back and kind of see if we can set up a quick call with the person who might be requesting that data, just to have the opportunity to kind of step back, zoom out a little bit, and understand what's the real question they're asking. Our former state demographer, Elizabeth Garner, always used to like to ask the question, so what, who cares? And I think bring a little bit of that to the process. So I think it's easy to kind of get bogged down and trying to find maybe that perfect piece of data that supports what you're looking for. And really kind of focus on that. But sometimes it's better to actually just think about holistically, what's the story we're trying to tell? And then from that story, how would we go about kind of crafting a number of pieces that support that story? So maybe it's really just looking instead, in that example, at the number of seniors who have hearing issues or something along those lines, and what that population is, how it's been changing over time. And so that's kind of how we like to think about these things, and really, again, zooming out and kind of thinking big picture and supporting people that way to help them think through that process of what question are they trying to answer, and what's a number of kind of pieces we can piece together to help with that story if there's not really that single perfect idea or concept.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, definitely appreciate that response. Moving on to Brian. Brian, you teach a class on accessing public data. Why did you create that class, and what are some of the key takeaways that you've received from that?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So we did create a class with the Colorado Secretary of State's office years ago on accessing public data. I would almost rename it today and call it demystifying public data to some extent. So there's a wealth of data that's out there. It's mostly free, and it can be really helpful for business decision making, for economic development, for grant writing, and business expansion plans and so on. But Unfortunately, I also sometimes see people make mistakes when accessing public data. So I thought I would just take a minute if you would give me just a moment to share a couple of examples that are kind of fun. So the lowest per capita personal income in Colorado in 2023 was in Crowley County. It came in at just over 25,000. But when we take a look at Crowley County's population, a lot of it is a group quarters population, thinking about the prison population down there, which makes up about 46% of Crowley County's total population. So when we adjust for group quarters, Crowley County's per capita personal income increases to 46,000. So it almost doubles it. Colorado's employment in 2024, we added 33,500 jobs for the year, but Colorado's unemployment rate increased 1 percentage point from 3.3% to 4.3%. And the number of unemployed people went up 32,000. So these are some of the questions I get. How can these two things exist at the same time? And it's really the structure of the data. One is an employer count of jobs, and the other one is a household survey that includes proprietors. GDP in Chaffee County in 2023 was 944 million, or it was 1.2 billion, right? Both published numbers on GDP, but what's the difference? One is the current dollar nominal GDP, and one is real inflation adjusted dollar GDP in 2017 dollars. So you can see how someone could grab both of those numbers and both be right, but sort of come to the wrong conclusion because they're not considering if it's real or nominal GDP. And another example, Grand Junction employment in from December of 2024 to March of 2025 increased by 100 jobs, or decreased by 1,100 jobs, right? So two very different stories. What's going on there? It's seasonality. So one is seasonally adjusted and one is not seasonally adjusted. So that we see this recurring predictable pattern in employment data if it's not seasonally adjusted. And we think about that especially for mountain resort communities where you have the peak ski season, and then you've got the mud season, and then the summer tourism traffic. So it's a bumpy pattern in reality, and a lot of this data is seasonally adjusted to sort of remove that seasonality from the data. And then one last one that I'll give you, Steve, is Colorado employment. In 2023, we had 4.2 million jobs according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. We had 2.9 million jobs according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We had 3.1 million jobs according to the BLS Laos data, and 3.15 million jobs according to census. So 4 published measures of top job totals in Colorado, all correct, but they're all counting slightly different things. So again, just sort of stressing that need for understanding the data. I find data exciting, I find it important, and I find it really powerful. But we need to understand the data that we're looking at so that we can make informed decisions and come to some good conclusions using those resources.
It's so interesting. I've definitely come across lots of instances of discrepancies in that data. Brian, do you have any advice for us? Like, as we're working through this data, if we're finding big discrepancies between different data providers, are there any steps that we can take to ensure that we're being consistent and using the most reliable data over others? Sometimes it's a little overwhelming for us when we're looking at this and we're not sure if the information we're providing in our reports is truly accurate or not. We're doing our best, of course. So I wasn't sure if there's any just general guidance that you might be able to provide for us users.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think I look at this data all the time, and Tim was just talking about looking at this data all the time, and so was Greg. We have that as sort of a luxury to be able to study this data, know how it's constructed, be able to talk people through what the differences are. But I think especially for the economic development community and some grant writers, they're working in very small operations, so they're asked to do a lot. They're asked to. It's not just looking at data; it's wearing many hats within an organization. So maybe you don't have that luxury to take the time to understand how some of these series are constructed or what they may mean. So I think, don't be shy about asking people. A lot of the resources are on this call today. Heather, Tim, Greg, myself. So universities are a great resource. Your counterparts are a great resource. Think about the State Labor Office, Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, SBDCs. There are so many people that you can ask, but I sort of implore you to take the time to ask so that you can sort of avoid some embarrassing missteps when reporting out to some of your stakeholders.
Yeah, great advice. And yeah, just gaining access to those experts in the fields is really a big step in that direction. Being able to find out if the data you're utilizing is legitimate or not. One more plug for the EDCC data committee with gaining access to those experts. Definitely a good way to have a strong connection there. Well, moving on, I'd like to turn my attention to Heather. So beyond the specific uses our audience members have for seeking out reliable data, what other aspects of data are important for us to consider in today's professional landscape? I mean, it seems like just a decade ago, strong data skills were largely confined to specialized roles. So Heather, can you speak to the increasing importance of basic data literacy across a much wider range of industries and job functions? And what are some of the key reasons for that shift? And like what does data literacy really mean for someone who might not consider themselves a data person?
Sure, thank you for that question. There are several factors that contribute to this, but as you mentioned, being able to look at data, well, first of all, find it, look at it, analyze it, and then talk about it, did seem more relegated to specialized roles, specifically areas like finance or maybe science, those kinds of things. But now, several things are contributing to the good reason to have basic data literacy in any job function these days. And one of those is just exponential data growth. I mean, we have more, the amount of data that's being generated now is exponential. And so this means that virtually every role, there will be people interacting with data much more frequently, and that will just continue to be the case. The other thing is there are more tools and platforms, even like the one we're talking about today on the EDCC, these resources. More of those are available to people now. So having a foundational understanding of data platforms and tools will just allow any individual and then cohesively as a team to not only use these more effectively, but increase the value in your role individually and as a team at work. And then we've all heard that term, data-driven decision making. It's a part of all of our areas of work now, but really to be a contributor to processes at work, whether it's strategy or whether it's daily operations, having a basic foundational understanding of data tools and platforms is a good way to be able to contribute to those processes. And then finally, one I'll mention is just the automation and integration of AI in our daily lives now. So everybody's workflows are being touched by automation and AI. So that is no longer just industry specific. It is nearly every industry now. And so being able to understand how AI and automation impact your particular industry and your role, and the team, the roles that your team plays can help with everything from being able to suss out potential bias in your systems, interpret the outputs that are happening with those particular tools. So I'll go back to something Greg said earlier. So what and who cares? Most of us need to be able to answer that in some way, shape, or form. Or if we're bringing new employees into our teams, see if they can answer those questions as well to be effective.
No, that's great. Yeah, working AI into the workplace has been super interesting the last year or so. But it's been exciting with building in those efficiencies into everyday workflow. But definitely something we all need to consider. Absolutely. Um, Getting back to our audience and the questions that were posed to you, it's a little bit quiet in the in the chat box from all of you. So I wasn't sure if any of you had anything top of mind, just as far as different types of data that you're looking for, any problems you're trying to solve and need data for, or any projects that you'd worked on recently where you did find a data resource that that was able to help you. At this point, I mean, if you'd like to come off mute and present your question to the panel, we'd be happy to adjust that right now. I'll give you a second if you'd like to speak up with any questions.
Steve, this is Jeff Engel. I have a quick question, or something to think about. You know, we talk a lot about data-driven information, decision-making, et cetera. I'm wondering how much opportunity there is for some of us to actually work with communities to interpret data. So I worry sometimes when we provide economic data to groups that aren't necessarily accustomed to working with it and interpreting it, how much it can get kind of lost in translation. And if anybody has thoughts or examples of how they've been able to work with communities on the interpretation side. I think we're all pretty, or a lot of us are pretty good at getting data to people. I think the interpretation is where there can be challenges. So just if anybody had thoughts on that.
Sure. It seems like maybe just taking those numbers and trying to find a way to tell a story to whoever you're trying to convince of those numbers. Did anyone one of our panelists want to speak on behalf of that?
I'd be happy to speak on that. I think that one of the things Brian brought up earlier was just about utilizing the resources that are in your community that you might not think of reaching out to first and foremost, like your economic development groups, sometimes your chambers, and then, for example, like in Tim's role, I know reaching out to, or even like the CSU extension offices. I know there are times when they've been able to really help us educate smaller groups on specific topics. And sometimes it depends on what your audience is. If it's the general public, that might look different than if you're talking to a smaller group that are in ag or something like that. But I think first and foremost is reaching out to people who can then direct you to the right resource for what it is you're looking for, because it will look different based on the audience. But it's a really good question. And as a former teacher, your question resonates with my head and heart very much, because we do need to make sure that people aren't just finding data and then using it indiscriminately. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I can jump in with maybe a couple of extra thoughts. I thought one of the things that was very helpful about what Brian did was he was able to show how these kind of two competing numbers might both be accurate depending on what they were actually trying to tell you, right? You actually had to know some details about what went into that number in order to be able to interpret it compared to another. And I think that's super important to be able to do. And kind of Brian laid that out well. The other thing that I think is helpful to do is to be able to think about how two separate ideas kind of coincide with each other, right? Like it's really hard to separate, say, workforce from housing. Those two things are pretty interrelated with each other, and you really have to think kind of holistically about how changing one has either a constraint or something else going on with another, in order to kind of understand the full picture of what's going on.
I appreciate that, Tim. Yeah, thanks for the responses, Tim and Heather. And yeah, great question, Jeff.
Just real quick here too, because I think it was also one of the points I think trying to touch on when I was talking about the process we like to use at the demography office. Because again, I think if people get too hung up on maybe a single particular data point, you can lose the forest for the trees. And so that's why stepping back and asking that question again of kind of, so what, who cares, is really important, and not losing track of the story. I think the other thing that is also important when you're communicating these things to people, which touches on a lot of what Brian was saying, is we also think a lot about margin of error when we're thinking about data points, because there is a certain amount of uncertainty that comes with a lot of data that we look at. A lot of it comes from surveys, and it's really important for people to understand that not all that data is necessarily perfect, and you run the risk sometimes of maybe overinterpreting certain data points if you miss the fact that perhaps there's a super wide margin of error on it. And that 30,000 personal income number, this is a little bit adjacent to Brian's if I'm just making up an example, but you might see a personal income or average income of say $30,000, but it might be 20 to 40,000. And that's a really huge range. And so especially when you're making comparisons, that they might not necessarily be as clear cut as you're looking at in some of those instances. I think Brian has his hand up.
Well, I just didn't want to be left out since everyone else responded. So I guess one other suggestion I have, Jeff, is when I'm trying to articulate an idea, or when I'm looking at a new data set, I also do look at what other people are writing about something, or how they're presenting data in a chart simply by Googling it, or using an AI assistant or something like that. And that always helps me just try and understand how I should be interpreting something, or some other considerations, or even just getting practice on telling another audience about a data point. Like, how do I articulate this idea? Here's how other people are articulating the idea.
Great, thanks you all so much for your responses. Looks like we have some questions coming in to the chat section. Drew Kramer, thanks for sending this question over to us. So, federal grant and loan programs often require applicants to paint a comprehensive picture of the communities they'll be assisting with the funding. So a company like theirs, 40 plus rural communities, they're looking to compile just a large number of data for the grants, from household income, unemployment, poverty, energy, food insecurities. Would you all be able to recommend like the best one-stop shop for finding credible numbers for completing these grants? Is there one, or would it be kind of finding a number of different resources to help with this?
Just to I think that there's a lot of some of the questions we're having. One self-talk is really dependent on the question. I think often it's not usually that simple, but looking at some of the examples you gave here, a lot of these are going to be within the American Community Survey. So this is a place we often go to, which is part of what it's a data set that is released by the Census Bureau that goes out and surveys people in across the state on an annual basis. The most recent, I think, is 2023. And that will cover a lot of these answers either directly or kind of indirectly by combining a couple different data points within this. It is a large data set, and it can be sometimes cumbersome, but there's a lot there that you can definitely utilize, and a place we go to for a lot of this sort of data. So I think that's one resource. Beyond that, though, there are often other places. It's just difficult because a lot of these do come from multiple sources. A lot of them might leverage the ACS and use it along with other data points, for instance, with employment data or other things to kind of create statistics. And so it's hard to put it in one place. One thing that I mean, this is not the easiest answer, but just kind of looking into my own personal workflow, you can kind of, like when I'm building models and setting them up, I try and always connect kind of data pools or other things. Like once I've looked things up a few times, saving that data down somewhere where I can keep accessing it. And if I have it, I will pull it for all the counties, and that way I can maybe try and filter it each time rather than having to go out to all those places. So I think starting to build your kind of own database or data inventory is just a always useful skill set over time to make that simpler. If there isn't a one-stop shop, maybe it's creating your own in some ways. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, great. Definitely helpful, Greg. And it looks like Trent Thompson just with the EA just posted some information as well with Aragon National Labs. They developed a software platform called Nerd that hosts a lot of economic data for everyone. So definitely worth a check. And the link has been provided by Trent. So thanks so much for responding with that. Another comment from Emily. Looks like there's some resources in addition to the CDLE that the local area public workforce centers offer for data resources too. So yep, don't forget about your public workforce centers. I know we definitely utilize them out here in Mesa County on the western slope. And we have a question from Sandy Engel, directed to Brian, wondering if you're still offering the Accessing Public Data class. And if so, is this something the general public or ED professionals can enroll in? And can you share related details on that?
Yeah, I put my email in the chat, so you can reach out to me directly. We offer these sort of on demand by request, and so it's a partnership with the Secretary of State's office. They underwrite a lot of it, so it can be free for your community. And we just look for 15 or 20 people, hopefully, to be in that workshop, and we can spend 2 to 4 hours going through these public data sets. It's very hands-on. So you bring your computer and we're actually looking up data together for your community. Because I think a lot of this is just muscle memory, pulling the data yourself, looking at it, analyzing it. And then you walk away and hopefully a little bit of that muscle memory sticks to where you can go out and access it on your own, after weeks or months.
Great. Thanks for that, Brian. Anyone else have any other questions for our panelists? We definitely have a little bit of time. I'll leave this open for anyone else that might have any requests.
Steve, could I add something to what Brian just offered?
Yeah.
There are, having taken the class that Brian offers or a version of it, I would highly recommend it. It's something we could pair with that. There are what I would call a bucket of really great, reliable, relevant data sources that many of us here on the panel access and use. And I keep a listing of those for myself and for when I go out and offer, educational sessions for people in my region, and I attach QR codes to them. I have them on slides. I'd be more than happy to share those with Kim afterwards that you could put out there. Now that's in addition to some of these resources, or maybe mirror some of the resources that are available on the EDC's resource page. The benefit of having an actual class like what Brian's talking about is that will give you the context around utilizing those resources. I will say though, many of these have become more user-friendly in my 7 to 9 years of working in economic development and being a daily user of data. Even the dashboards, the resources that accompanied those dashboards and those tools to explain what those things mean have gotten much better. I'm not sure how my panelists, my coworkers here would feel about that, but if you've seen improvements, but I feel like I certainly have. So they are a bit more user-friendly.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Heather.
I've got a question, if we've got just a couple of minutes. Heather, how do you work with some of the private data sets, and how do they complement the public data that you're accessing?
Sure. We do work with a couple private data sets, one being Lightcast. I'll just use them as an example. And one of the ways that we work with them is to either do customized reports sometimes you do get those very specific questions. So it might be drilling down into a particular occupation within an industry and looking at some statistics around that for whatever reason. And then the other thing that I do differently is I rely very heavily on them to, because many of them are subscription based. So it's pay to play. And if we're going to pay, I utilize their customer service a lot to make sure that if there's something I don't understand, I have them run the report and then get on the phone with me or on a Zoom to work through that. And then sometimes even say, okay, could you create me 3 bullet points, or could you create me with something I can put on a slide? Again, you can do a little more of that if you're paying for a subscription, but don't be afraid to ask, because that's their job.
Well, great. Looks like we have a couple other questions that that came in, and something from Kim as well. But that would be great if Tim, would you be able to speak on your the bid study and how you're thinking about the impact of COVID in relation to that?
Sure. That one actually was not, the impact of COVID wasn't kind of a part of that kind of thought process. For people who are kind of familiar, business improvement districts, businesses come together in order to basically tax themselves to get different services. And there's just under 40 of them in the state of Colorado. And they're largely on the Front Range, but not totally. So the biggest thing, and this is where that other side of kind of my work is kind of trying to understand what the comparison group is. Who are you going to compare a location that got a bid, or that, I guess, decided to come together to tax themselves for a bid with? And we have a couple of different ways to do that. And our way is probably the goal, at least, is one of the more teched up ones, where we're trying to use some machine learning and artificial intelligence to kind of figure out what a similar sort of area is that did not get one, or one that gets one, but it's later on in time. And that's how we're going to try to make kind of that comparison, really to try to measure how different ones move the needle. That's really our goal in these instances, is we have a bunch of different policies and trying to figure out how something, if it actually moves the needle and how much, is kind of the goal and that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And Kim put a request in the chat, and this is a great project that Region 9 and the State Demography Office worked on, and it was regarding the housing needs assessment for Region 9. Heather or Greg, would you be able to speak on behalf of this project that you were working on?
I'd be happy to tee it up, and then I'll leave it to Greg to talk about the actual inner workings. We're doing some work again around housing and housing needs assessments, given that that will be a requirement for communities of a certain size, and that's part of the Prop 123 work. And so we ran into the same situation that came up earlier on the webinar about a discrepancy about housing units or number of housing units. And so in order for our local governments to establish a baseline from which they can work from, we needed to solve that mystery. So we got with our good friend Greg and the demography office. And Greg, I'll let you take it from here to explain in more detail.
I think a good example of how we always like to help out and help educate, I think, along the way. For people who may or may not be familiar, there was a bill passed last year, SB 174, that requires local governments to perform housing needs assessments. And so there's probably a number of people on the call who are working on these either now or will be soon. And as part of it, there's a bunch of data requirements within first of all, there's kind of a guide you can find on the DLG website that outlines what these reports look like and what data is included. There's a lot of requirements that were part of the legislation that may or may not be easily available necessarily. And so we like to try and help help people guide to maybe the best answer if you can't find the exact answer. And so this seemed like, in some ways, a simple enough question. It was the number of housing units that are in the area being looked at. I think this may have been region-wide, if I remember correctly, Heather, but looking at the total number of housing units, but then broken down by whether they were single family or multi, like duplexes, triplexes, et cetera. And so when you start getting to that, we do create an estimate in our office of the total number of housing units in each county. And so that can kind of help create a baseline. But we don't have this breakdown by these specific unit types. And so Heather and her team were working on this, and they one of the other resources we pointed them to was the American Community Survey, again, a place I've mentioned before as a often resource, and they do provide these breakdown of unit types. However, when your team kind of started putting it together and taking those estimates, they didn't add up to our number, and I think we're fairly far off if you're kind of taking that breakdown by that. And so a lot of the reason for this is, again, what is produced in the ACS is based on a survey, and so it's imperfect. There's a margin of error associated with all of these, and so when you start looking at all of these margins of error, you realize, well, that leaves a lot of wiggle room for these things to not add up together. And so because of that, it can be, again, creating these consistent projects from how all of you are operating and creating these reports. You want them to add up so that people aren't confused reading them. And so in that case, we help kind of guide through a process of taking that ACS data, just calculating the percentage of units in each of these areas based on the ACS, and applying it to our kind of more I guess rigorous, I would say, total unit count, which has been had more time. It's more precise. I think it's more accurate. And then using those to kind of estimate what those amounts would be for each of the individual unit types. I think something else we really urged a lot during this process is when you're putting these together, make sure somewhere you do show your work. It's just because if someone goes and looks up that ACS data and they say, well, where did this come from? It doesn't add up. Make sure at least there's an appendix or a footnote that explains kind of what that process is and what that kind of final data piece you created is. But I think this is a demonstrating how sometimes it's also a little bit of mixing methods, and there is creativity always necessary in a lot of analyses. And so thinking through those sort of processes and then again making sure to show all your work. So that was something we had worked on together, and it was a great opportunity to get to know some of the people a little bit better. And we always like working with different groups. But it's also really important for us because, again, as we're putting together these recommendations, data sets, which we're trying to start piecing together for people to create a one-stop shop in some ways for this as a kind of objective for us, for at least some of the data that we have regular access to, because a lot of places are looking for this. Knowing how people are using this data, what issues they're coming up on, is important feedback for us also as we kind of develop some of our own data products. And so we also really appreciated that opportunity.
Great, amazing project. And Kim provided a link for the survey data, the community survey data report in the link, so you can take a look at that. We have time for another question or two if there's anything that's pressing for anyone else in the audience today. All right, well, that being said, I think we
Dave?
Will.
Actually, Emily has a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Go ahead, Emily.
That's okay. Sorry, I was using the raise hand. But hi, I'm Emily Tapia with Arapahoe Decklist Works, and I live in definitely the public sector data world. And so this is a challenge for us, but we also hear it from the businesses we work with. How, what are the resources and how are we moving forward at the pace of business to provide actionable data, since so much of the public sector data lags in reporting, and how can we be most responsive, or what are you seeing around that?
I think that's a good question for Brian, if he can answer that.
Yeah, I totally agree that it is sort of frustrating because we're still looking at fourth quarter of 2024 for state level GDP. I think some of the employment data is pretty timely, where we just have to wait a month for the CES data series, but that goes down from the nation to the state then from the state to the metro area. So that helps maybe you, Emily, being at Arapahoe Douglas Works, being in the Denver MSA, but it doesn't help out someone in Chaffey County because their data lags more. We're looking at September 2024 data for the QCW, county level series. And so that's sort of the most current data for our rural areas. We can take a look at employment data, the household survey data that only lags a month at the county level. And for some cities, but that data has a pretty small sample size at the county level and therefore a high margin of error. So I don't sort of rely on that to a great level. We do try and pair some private data sets with public data in practice. And I'll give you an example of that. So I've always really appreciated the Census on the Map series that shows commuting patterns. And you can take a look at primary job or total jobs commuting patterns. You can see where people are commuting from and commuting to, but it's based on tax data. So it lags even more. So I think we're looking at maybe 2023 data or 2022 data. Commuting patterns shouldn't shift a whole lot, from year to year, but it does move, and it's really insightful data. So what we use to bring that more current, we have access to a private data series called Placer AI, and it's some cell phone tracking data. And so that allows us to sort of bring that story a little bit more current, but there's a cost to it. And so I think for not any, but for many of these series, there might be a private data set that can sort of complement what you're getting on the public side. But there's trade-offs to all of this, and oftentimes it's the cost is the greatest trade-off.
Great, appreciate the response, Brian, and great question, Emily.
I can just quickly add, I think one other thing we sometimes don't know ourselves doing who our office doesn't often have access to much private data. Also sometimes maybe, even though imperfect, trying to use other data sets that we might have available to try and advance our estimates in a way that hopefully is at least somewhat consistent so that we can try and get at it because yeah, you might not be able to find the most recent, but if you know certain things about maybe how industries have changed from another more recent data set or what's happening at the national level, maybe you can apply some of those things to try and estimate what might be happening. But again, a lot of uncertainty with that and use caution. That sometimes that's if you need to get an answer, your only real way to do it. But yeah, because we run into this all the time because the ACS is the most recent is 2023. Brian mentioned on the map, which is I think 2022. And we rely on these data sources a lot. And the world has changed a lot since some of these times, especially with the ACS. When you're talking about rural counties, there's a 5-year sample size. So that's 2019 to 2023. In a lot of those counties, 2019 and 2020 looks very different from 21, 22, 23, understanding that what you're looking at there is that 5-year sample. And so sometimes these numbers might not necessarily feel right to people. And there's actually a good reason why. And it's because some of it is from a period that was maybe very different, kind of pre-COVID to post.
And to add on to that comment, Greg, Heather, didn't Region 9 work to solve some of that, like with your livable wage?
So one of the things that question was making me think about that Emily asked is that depending on your situation and your project, it's good to use that public data, but then potentially incorporate survey data or very timely relevant data. So I'll talk about livable wage briefly, but first I'd like to mention that we just recently did this in Durango. The city of Durango is considering a minimum wage increase. They're exploring and studying whether to do that. And so there are some studies out there about some other cities in Denver that have done that. But what we really needed was to be able to look at some of the public data, which is what is the average hourly wage, what's the median hourly wage, and then break that down by certain industries that are relevant in our area. But really pairing that with some of the survey data that's here and now for the businesses to get the temperature reading of how they feel about that, what impact that might have, was very valuable to put together for the City Council study session. So that's one thought, is just that sometimes really well constructed surveys that are your own can be helpful to pair. On the livable wage side, we do use public data, but we utilize, but we then take and do our own work locally to customize some specific pieces and parts, namely housing and childcare costs, so that when the budgets that we use for self-sufficiency to address livable wage for our communities, the housing and childcare, we know from the public sources, are not accurate for our communities. So again, part of this is working with our own experts in real estate, property management, and then our regional early childhood council to customize those particular data sets.
All right, well, incredible. Oh, thanks for the comment, Emily. Definitely appreciate that. Okay, last call for any last questions before we start to wrap things up. We still have a little bit of time left.
I think the one thing I do want to make a comment on, just, to Emily's points, when we are working with businesses on anything that has anything to do with workforce or skilled trades, certainly reach out to your local workforce programs, because they have business directors that help you with that. So I just would like to call that out, is that our workforce centers do have those capabilities. Arapahoe Douglas Works is actually one of the best examples that we have. And if you do have any questions about your workforce center, Emily might actually be a really good resource to help you, navigate that system. But our business service managers out of the workforce centers are a really great resource.
Kim, could I add one other resource that came to mind for any of our grant applicants on the call, people who are searching for grants? Data is one of the main things that you have to go out there and get. And somebody mentioned earlier about storytelling and putting stories together with that. So another resource that I would recommend is reaching out to the grant writers in your area, because they're the ones that may be able to teach you how to turn certain sentences that have stats in them into more of a story. So I'll give you an example. Here would be the before sentence. Our program aims to support 30 small businesses with technical assistance and capital. Okay, you're making a case. Let's say you're looking for technical assistance and capital. Here would be the after. One of those businesses is a startup farm operated by a first-generation farmer in our county. With early access to funding and guidance, she grew from 3 clients to 40 and now employs 2 part-time staff. So there's a real difference in those. For those of you that have applied for grants, I'm sure some of that sounds familiar, but they might also be a great resource, grant writers, to help take that data and put the human side of it onto your project.
Yeah, really important, really impactful. Great point, Heather. Great example too. All right, last call for any other questions or comments from either the panelists or the audience here. Okay, there being none, just really like to thank the panelists. Thank you so much, audience, for your participation. And I would just like to remind you to please visit the data resources page as often as you can, because we're going to continuously update it with current resources that are available to you. Please utilize the request custom data feature and engage with the EDCC data committee for customized reports. And finally, if you're interested in signing up for the EDCC Data Committee, please submit your requests through the portal that's on the website, or simply email Kim or I, and we'll get you ready to go for our next monthly meeting. That being said, I will pass the mic over to Kim and let you wrap up.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Let's give everybody a big applause over Zoom for our panelists and our moderator today. Thank you so much for spending time with us and helping us understand data better. So also thank you to our professional development committee and our data committee for putting this together. And again, the webinar will be up on our website so that you can access it. We will also be sending the presentation to you here via email, as well as linking you to those pages. Also, we have 2 more webinars this week, so make sure to get registered. May 14th, Downtown Colorado Inc., Tools for Downtown Development, as well as our partners with the Startup Colorado, aligning economic development with the startup ecosystem strategy. And finally, we do have our events calendar, so please visit that. We've got a virtual series coming up in August, Basic Economic Development in June, our big conference in October, along with our EDDie Awards, as well as the Knowledge Network in December. And for any additional tools, resources, or network, please visit our website. We would love for everyone to ask any questions after this, and we can certainly follow up with that as well. So with that, happy Economic Development Week. Let's get celebrating, get putting it up on our social media and making sure that we're expanding the airwaves about how important economic development is. So thank you. Talk to you guys soon. See you on Wednesday. Happy Economic Development Week, everybody.